That'll happen in one day.
You seem to.
The Uniform Code of Military Justice, basically, I was going to be charged with 50-some counts. And fraternization, conduct unbecoming an officer, and so forth. Well, I was pretty freaked out. I was happy to get my orders to leave, but I was thought, now I'm going to be court-martialed. And my commander had already warned me, my commander who was at a base 275 miles north of where I was, had warned me that I was facing 20 years in prison. I mean, he was threatening me. But his operations officer said it was only going to be 5 years. I mean, that was the kind of interaction that was happening, and I was, you know, it was like very, it was a baptism of fire into, it's where I learned my first lessons of resistance and resilience. Just, I survived, you know, and I wasn't killed, and I actually was not court-martialed, and I got out after 4 years with an honorable discharge as a captain. But I think the reason they didn't court-martial me was because I would have talked about those villages. And in 1970, they didn't need any more bad publicity about the war. So that's just my theory. Question here.
Yeah, I'm really curious what it is that would make one soldier say, you know, see what you saw and reacted as you did, and perhaps like Cant Wait, and would perhaps make another soldier maybe sort of delude themselves, maybe be like, well, it has to be done, or, you know, feel it's justified. Like, what, do you think it's maybe something like from like law school or some personality trait?
The question is, what would explain that two people would see the same scene and have two completely different reactions? Now, the officer that I was with in those villages was Vietnamese. He was from a very wealthy Vietnamese family that had worked with the French for many decades. Today we would call them collaborators. But it's the easy way out. When you have an invading force, you either work for the invaders or you become a resistor. And if you're going to be a resistor, you're likely to be in prison or killed at an early age. And he'd been educated in the United States, and he hardly had an accent. So he was a white man all the way. And his response was, "These are communists," and he had a big smile on his face. And I don't know how old he was, but he was probably 30, 28, 30. I was 27. And I really don't have an answer as to how different people respond in different situations. I was older. If I had been 20, I probably wouldn't have responded that way. But I was 27. The brain goes through developmental stages in the cortex. In like 25, 26, you have much better judgment and discernment capacities than you do when you're 18 or 20. That's why they like young people in the military. They're so easily molded and brainwashed. And yet I was pretty brainwashed. But it took that circumstance, for whatever reason, it wasn't a cognitive thing that happened to me. It was all my body. When I looked at these people on the ground, I was feeling my chest and my stomach and my intestines. It was like constriction. That was forcing my bile juice out. I mean, it was gagging. It was just like this is just beyond grasp, you know, beyond what's acceptable for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. In Ranger training, something had happened that gave me a clue, but I wasn't clear about it at the time, exactly what it meant. During the bayonet training, I didn't plunge the bayonet in the dummy and shout kill 100 times. And I refused to do it. But it wasn't my brain that was wanting to refuse it. My brain was saying, just do it, even if you don't like it, just do it. But my arms did not want to do this. And so I later concluded that, many years later, I concluded that our bodies are, you know, basically our mind is our whole being. And the brain is just one little part that kind of interprets and analyzes, but that the viscera, the tissues, the body itself has its own wisdom. And I think it's an archetype. I think if we go back far enough in the development of the human condition, cooperation and mutual respect were much more important than than violence or competition. Not that they didn't exist or don't exist, but that empathy and equity, justice, mutual respect are ancient human characteristics that in the modern period have almost been totally preempted by individualism, acquisition, and competition. But the archetypes are in us. Those values are ancient. They are in us. And that's what I think happened to me, is that somehow there was like a lightning bolt that broke through here so that I could feel ancient truths. If you plunge the bayonet in somebody else, sooner or later the bayonet comes back into you in some metaphorical way. I talk about it in my memoirs. I mean, there's just a conclusion I've come from studying anthropology, psychology, quantum physics, blah, blah, blah. Question over here.
I'm curious what happened immediately after in Concord. I had a friend who said told me he was down there and there was some kind of event, mentioned Joe Baez. Was there an immediate?
Yeah, there was 4 days later, on September 5th, there were 9,000 people that showed up and ripped up the tracks. And every train from the day I was hit on September 1st, which really didn't stop. It stopped 300 feet further down the track and was surrounded by about 50 armed Marines. Every train was stopped for 8 years, day and night. There were always several dozen people at that site 24 hours a day after I got hit. And on the 5th day, the 4th day after, September 5th, of course, I'm in the hospital. 9,000 people showed up and ripped up the tracks and piled the ties and the rails up in a sculpture, and the cops just had to watch it because there were too many people. Joan Baez was there, Jesse Jackson was there. I don't even know who all was there. I heard about it, as I was coming. I didn't actually have a whole lot of awareness for at least 5 days afterwards. I had this huge brain injury, and I didn't even know I lost my legs. I mean, I don't actually have memory of being hit by the train. There were 40 of my friends were there, so I've heard about it a lot. Question here?
Well, I just wanted to comment. I got together with Brian in like 97 or so, and I didn't have any memory of this event because I think I was on vacation. I don't really know, but because I was very aware of what was happening in Central America and everything. I think I would have noticed, at least on the news, that this guy got run over. I was living in the Bay Area, but I think I was.
It was in the news.
But anyway, I just want to comment that after we got together, there have been several times when we run into somebody who was there at the tracks afterward, helping to rip them up, and they meet Brian. There's this emotional response. People just break out crying, and I think it takes them back to that emotional time. It was a pretty big deal.
Well, yeah, it was a miracle I survived. I mean, nobody's ever survived being run over by a train, as far as I know. I have pictures that'll be in my book where you can see my legs sticking out underneath the locomotive, or draped over the rail. And then after the train goes by me, I'm slumped on the tracks, and people are coming to me. I mean, there were 4 photographers there that were all going to document my arrest. But and a videographer who had also been in Nicaragua, who was just documenting my arrest. He wanted to make sure if there was any police abuse, we had a record of it. So, you never know what's going to happen. Life's an unpredictable journey.